Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chasing Collectibles Catchup. I'm Tyler,
I'm Lauren over here.
I'm Tim.
and we're very excited to have a very special guest with us, Mr. Aaron Lopresti. And Lauren, since you have known Aaron for some time, I thought you could give him a little bit of an introduction before we get started.
All right, this is the amazing artist Aaron Lopresti from Portland, Oregon. That's where I first met him 30 years plus ago. I asked him to draw many different Spider-Man characters, different scenarios, and he's done a whole bunch of different art that I've got. And we're just lucky to have him here, and I appreciate you joining us, Aaron. Thanks so much, and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the invitation. This is great.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is we've always wanted to have you on. We've discussed it in various scenarios. We just want you to come on and hang out with us for a little bit and talk all things comics and art. Speaking of which, about what age did you say I want to draw? You figured out, wow, I want to take lessons, or I just want to start?
Well, I had this joke from when I was very, very young that I was born spinning a basketball on a pencil, because those are the two things I loved, was basketball and drawing. And I don't remember a time where I wasn't drawing. I have memories in kindergarten of like doing drawings at home and bringing them and passing them out to the class and things like that. And I've got some drawings someplace that I think were pre-K that I just did at home, watching Flintstones cartoons or whatever, and trying to copy those types of things. So I don't have like a memory of me not drawing any more than I have a memory of me not wanting to be a basketball player when I was very little. I mean, it just seems like I always played. And I didn't want to, or didn't discover comic books till I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And that's when kind of my focus shifted from just, random drawing of cartoons and things like that to specifically comic book stuff. And so I was about 10 years old when I started, 9 or 10 years old when I started collecting comic books regularly. And that sort of focused my art interests in that direction.
That's awesome. I'm a huge basketball fan too, and I'm surprised that I didn't challenge you at some point to, some hoops, because I used to play.
Well, you'd have been sorry if you had, but
I couldn't get up high enough to dunk it, but I have been close. But I was full of trickery, though.
I played basketball. I was pretty good. I played basketball through high school, and but when you start looking at playing post high school, you're not going to be a Division I player. You're going to be maybe a Division III or small college or something like that. You're kind of like, why do I want to continue to practice year round and beat yourself into the ground? And for I my love of the game by the time I graduated high school I still enjoyed it, but to be really thoroughly committed to it, I was done. And my focus became more on art and film and some other things that I tried to get into. And so I just, I played rec league ball to keep myself interested until I was 28, and I was in a rec league. In the same season, I dislocated my jaw, and then somebody, came up underneath me with an elbow and dislocated my jaw. And then that same season, I tore ligaments in my ankle. And I was like, you know what?
Wow.
I'm done. That's it.
That's
at 28, that was it.
Good note to. So the next interview will not be at a basketball court, or what do you think?
Well, can we do it where it's like you guys think that maybe you guys still have a little left in you, a little Lauren versus Aaron, or
Dude, there is nothing left in this tank. I had
same here.
I had shoulder surgery last year, and it still bothers me, rotator cuff surgery. And I'm still, the guy's like, yeah, you can start playing basketball again if you want to. And I'm like, I haven't shot a basketball in 10 years. I don't think I can even get it up over my shoulder anymore. So yeah, those days are gone. I can just see myself being out there for about 2 minutes and blowing my knee out or something. I was just like,
Oof.
no,
All for a stupid pickup game.
Yeah.
exactly. It's not worth it.
Nope. We'd
Well,
wreck ourselves.
Yep.
well, speaking of your, committing to going into, drawing professionally, you said that can't remember a time you weren't drawing. Did you have to go through any sort of like professional training at any point? Like, did you go to school at all to draw just to give yourself more of that knowledge, or is most of your skills kind of like developed over time?
Well, unfortunately, I was very foolish, and I had a very high opinion of myself very young in terms of my artistic ability, which was grossly misplaced. And so for some reason, I went to Oregon State, and I did not pursue art out of college. I was like, my thinking was, I'm going to get a business degree so I can, handle my own contracts and do all this stuff. And then I was going to, move to New York and be a comic book artist, and then, do prints and portfolios and, and manage my own career and all this kind of stuff. And so I took a few art classes while I was there, but not, my focus wasn't on it. And I got booted out of business school because I could not get past calculus. That was where, I hit the ceiling in math, which is funny because my wife's a math teacher, but man, that was it for me. And so when I got booted out of the business school at Oregon State, I went to junior college and got all my general ed requirements out of the way. And I had got really interested in film in high school. And so I ended up at film school at USC. And again, there I took some art classes while I was there to kind of stay connected, but I really wasn't practicing my craft at all. And it wasn't until I got out of film school and realized that that was probably not the best career move. And then I decided I wanted to pursue comics again. I was, it was like 25, I think. And so basically I really hadn't drawn much since when I was 17 or 18 in high school. And so my skills had really sort of, it just really retarded my skills to a point where here I was this 25 to 28-year-old working on my craft and trying to get into comics and drawing like a 19-year-old because I hadn't really practiced and really got focused. And so I was able to hook up with a commercial arts studio after film school in LA for a while. I moved back to Portland and I hooked up with a commercial arts studio there, and I learned a lot of stuff there. And while I was working in commercial art in the studio, I was sending off samples and, making phone calls and making trips back to New York to show my portfolio to Marvel and DC to try and break in. But I made it a lot harder on myself. If I had just gone to some semblance of art school, I think when I had graduated high school and stayed on that direct path, I probably would have been able to break in at Marvel when I was, 21, 22 years old. And in the early, well, that would have been, early to mid 80s, and might have had a different trajectory on my career, but I got distracted with other things that were of interest to me. And it took me a while to come back around to that.
That's amazing.
So to answer your question, I'm pretty much self-taught with the instruction I did get at the commercial arts studio I worked at for a couple of years, and the various classes here and there that I took while I was in college for different things besides art.
That's awesome. I wish I could just teach myself how to draw. I taught myself how to play drums, but
Well,
it's
the same
it's
thing.
an art the same, but
Yeah.
I've always loved art and drawing, especially comic art.
Mm-hmm. Well, there wasn't, other than the Kubert School at that time in New Jersey, there really wasn't a lot of, you didn't go someplace to learn how to be a comic book artist. You went to schools to become an illustrator, and then, you went whatever direction you wanted once you graduated. Now there's, you go to all these different colleges, and almost every college has some sort of comic book art program. Whether it's any good or not is another question. But back then there wasn't really an avenue for that. So you went either to become an illustrator And then, like I said, you would, find your way after you graduated. Or a lot of guys, of course, were talented enough that coming out of high school or maybe a few years after that, they were able to kind of like jump into the industry, like, somebody like Arthur Adams, or somebody who started very young, or, Joe Madureira was a guy who started very young. So there were guys that got in there, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. But those are the guys that are like, super, super talented. And the rest of us sort of had to kind of work our way into it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a like a superhero that in your time of drawing that you've really enjoyed, drawing and working on the most?
You're talking about professionally or just in general? Professionally, stuff I've worked on.
Either or
Probably the Hulk. I mean,
Yeah.
he's kind of like this. I'm a big monster guy, and so he's like the perfect combination of a superhero and a monster, right? You're getting the best of both worlds there. And I had a short run on the Hulk. I worked on Planet Hulk. Carlo Peglione was the original artist on Hulk. And when they decided to do this Planet Hulk story arc that branched out over a year long, and the editor called me up and said, "Hey, Carl is not going to be able to keep a monthly schedule on this book for what we want to do. So we want to do rotating story arcs. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So basically he would do the first 4 issues, and I did the next 4 issues. And then he did, I think, the next 2, then I did the next 2, then he wrapped it up or something like that. And so, so that was a great story arc. I assume you guys have read it. If you haven't, you should check it out, because it's like,
Oh, yeah.
it is to Hulk what Beta Ray Bill Simonson's run was to Thor. You know what I mean? It was just, it's that important of a Hulk storyline. And I would just happen to be in the right place at the right time to get an opportunity to work on it.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite ones too.
Yeah, it's just a great story. And it was hard work, because there was a lot of like Romanesque type soldiers and battles and tons of characters and things like that. But it was so fun to work on. The guy that wrote it, Greg Pak, he was a film school student at NYU. So we would, exchange stories. That he was a New York film student, and I was an LA film student, and we would, so we connected and got along really well. And so it was really well written, and it was a lot of fun to work on. So I would probably say that, if you're not counting characters I created myself, if you're talking about characters for the big 2, then probably that run on Hulk would probably have been my favorite thing.
So what characters you've created yourself? What would be probably your favorite of those two?
Well, I got 2 of them behind me on those banners, as you can see there. The one in the middle is called Garbage Man, and that was a series I did for DC Comics, but it was a creator-owned thing that I did for DC Comics. And it's kind of a combo of Swamp Thing and Sludge, if you guys remember that from my days at Malibu. And I wrote it and drew it. And recently, when I left, well, actually, before I left DC, we were able to get, when I say we, I'm sorry, Kevin McGuire also we were in the same book together, and he did a creator-owned character called Tanga, which was this alien chick. And we were always kind of debating on whether we'd be able to get the rights back to these things or not. And then Dan DiDio just gave them to us. He didn't have to, because we had an agreement with DC that each of us individually, of course, not together, but the agreement was basically that we created these characters, and DC would license the character from us for a fee of $2,000, but then they could keep them forever. All they had to do was meet a couple of criteria. One, they had to publish something with the character in it once every 3 years or something, right? And then they could just keep the license. We would still be technically the copyright owner of the character, but they would have the license forever. So we wouldn't really be able to do anything with it, but we would get a higher royalty or percentage if they did anything with the character. So there was really no incentive for them to give it back to us. But, I got along great with Dan DiDio. I know he's kind of a polarizing figure because he was the head of DC for so long. It's inevitable, but I got along with him great. And I just think out of the kindness of his heart, he's just like, here, you guys, we don't need these, take them back. And so I've recently had a trade paperback collected of all the stuff I did at DC, and I had Dark Horse publish it, and it's actually out right now, the Garbage Man trade paperback. And that's probably some of, if not the best work I've done in comics is in that, within that series, because I didn't have, there was no deadline pressure. It was kind of like, we were just kind of putting it together as I got it done kind of thing. And then once it was kind of put together, they formatted it and packaged it and all that kind of stuff. So it was really no pressure at all in terms of, deadlines and things like that. There are the things that usually you end up having to cut a corner here or there to get something done on time. And that wasn't the case with that book. So that was
It's
probably,
got to make it easier on you as
Yeah.
far as, like you said, no pressure. It's just take my time. I don't like this. I'm going to erase it, start over.
yeah, exactly.
awesome.
And it gave you time to put more thought into like your designs and your layouts for the pages and things like
Yeah.
that maybe you wouldn't normally get. And it was really great because if I was working on, let's see, when I first started working on the script, I was drawing Wonder Woman for DC. And so when I got done with Wonder Woman, and we were kind of looking to see, okay, well, what are you going to do next? Let's say there was, I think I went to Justice League Generation Lost after that. But there was a period of time in there where there was, well, we're not ready. We're not going to be ready for this for 2 months or something. And I'd say, okay, well, I'll just work on Garbage Man for 2 months. And whatever I got done in that 2-month period of time. And then I'd go and work on Justice League or whatever. And then when there was a gap, I'd go in and, work on Garbage Man again. And that, so it came together that way. So it was really, like I said, it was really a low pressure situation for an artist to be under. So one of the very few times in my life that I was able to work without deadline pressure just bearing down on me,
I can imagine.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
so you've alluded to working for DC. Of the two, I guess, how did you first get into? I'm not sure which one you got into first because you've worked for both, but I've always been curious when I read comics and I see the authors and the artists and all that. I wonder how do you get into a publisher like that? So how did you first get into comics like that?
Well, there's the old fashioned way, which I used because I'm old. And then there's like what people are doing now, which is basically using the internet, but that didn't exist, in the late 80s and early 90s. And so what you had to do was you had two routes available to you. You could do some sample pages and you could mail them in, Xerox of the sample pages to an editor at either Marvel or DC and hope that they opened the envelope and looked at your samples, or you would go to a major convention because they would only show up at like San Diego and New York or Chicago or someplace like that. They wouldn't, you're not going to get those editors and publishers showing up at a Portland show or a Seattle show. It wasn't big enough for them to bother with. So what I did was, before I moved back to Portland, I was living in LA. I'd gotten out of film school and I think I was reading scripts for TriStar or something, dumb like that. And so that's when I started putting together samples and stuff for comic book publishers. I picked up some work for a company called Blackthorn in LA. And this was kind of during the independent comic book boom, the black and white boom when the Turtles came out and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of independent publishers trying to kind of get a little piece of the market. And Blackthorn was one of them. And I did a couple, like I did Solomon Kane 3D I think was the very first job I ever did. I did a couple of Rambo comics for them, but I don't know if they ever got published. Because I know they didn't pay me for all that stuff either, but that was the risk you ran, right? Back when I was trying to break in, you were more concerned about getting published than you were getting paid. And so anyway, it dawned on me that I was living in LA and San Diego was only 120 miles away. And they had the biggest convention in the world there. And it's kind of like, well, why am I not going to this show? And so I put together, talk about overkill. I wrote a 20-page Spider-Man story and drew it, penciled it. and took it to San Diego as my sample. Really, all you need to do is about 5 pages, right? But I did the whole freaking story.
Overkill.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And so Terry Cavanaugh, who was the editor at Marvel for Marvel Comics Presents, if you guys remember that, it was a bi-weekly anthology book that basically had a Wolverine story and then a bunch of whatever else they filled it with. And so Terry Cavanaugh was at the Marvel booth at San Diego, and I went in there and I just went up to him and I said, "Hey, would you look at my portfolio?" And he did, and he said, "No, this isn't too bad." He goes, "I might be able to use you on Marvel Comics Presents." And I thought, well, he just gave me a job. Well, it's not exactly what happened, but so what I did was I got home and then I started calling him, right? Because we couldn't again send an email or anything. I had to call him on the phone, and most of the time you get their answering machine, but once in a while they would pick up, right? And so I kept bugging him saying, "Hey, remember you told me you'd send me a story, blah, blah, blah." And I'm trying to remember if I actually had to go to New York before he gave me that job, or if it was, I think I actually got him on the phone and he said, okay, I'll send you something. And so he did this, I did this 8-page Spider-Man story. It was the very first stuff that published at Marvel. And then I thought, well, I'm in, right? No, never heard from anybody again. That was it. And so I had to go right back to calling all the time and calling various editors. And then I started planning trips where I would go back to New York every 6 months. So this is when I hooked up at the Commercial Art Studio in Portland. So I had some income coming in, and I would save up my money. And then every 6 months I would fly back to New York and either, stay with a friend or, stay someplace super cheap, and then spend a week there just going back and forth to DC showing my portfolio. Mostly my focus was at Marvel. I did go to DC one time, but growing up, I was pretty much a Marvel zombie. So it was like, that was where my interest was at that time. And what I did was I got in good with the receptionist at Marvel, and she would let me in when I didn't have an appointment, right? So you'd go into it was really funny because you'd take the elevator up and you'd walk into the Marvel lobby, and there was always several people sitting there, and probably a lot of people that wanted to show their portfolios or whatever, right? And I would go up and start talking to her, and then she would just buzz me in, right? So then I would walk around the Marvel offices and with no appointment with anybody, right? And then I would just wait to see if I could find somebody whose door was open, and then I'd go annoy them, right? Now,
Oh my God.
I had done the job for Terry Cavanaugh, and you'd always get this look like they'd go, how did you get in here? What are you doing here? Kind of thing, And so I remember sitting outside Terry Cavanaugh's office because I wanted to talk to him, but he was on the phone. So I'm just sitting out there with my portfolio, and he knew, what I was doing out there. And I remember him talking on the phone for a little bit, and he looks over at me a couple times and he shuts his door.
He's like,
it's like a stiff arm.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, and
relentless.
yeah, but I didn't give up, because you can't, right? And so I would either go bug somebody else, and then when his door opened up again, I would go back and bug, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're on the phone. I didn't mean to disturb you, but can you hook me up with something else?" And I think he eventually gave me like a Submariner story, and I did, and it sat in a drawer for a couple of years, I think, before they actually used it. But then I met other people while I was there, and Renee Witterstatter was one of the people I met, and she was an assistant editor there, but she was in charge of their humor comic called What The, right? Which is basically a Marvel parody book. And I was able to convince her to let me do a parody story in there with Forbish Man, right? And who is a 1968 character from Marvel's parody series from 68 called Not Brand Echh. And it was, he was like their little, mascot for the book. And so I thought, I'm going to be genius.
Didn't he have like a pot on his head?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he wore long red underwear and
yeah.
and he would this nerdy guy who wanted to be a superhero kind of thing. So I started writing
these young ones over here on the left, they don't remember that.
Yeah, they're like, Forbish, man, what the heck is that? And well, I think that Stan Lee back in the 60s had come up with basically this sort of Alfred E. Newman, was kind of like the mascot for Mad Magazine. And he came up with something similar, which he called him Irving Forbish. And so he would reference Irving Forbish, but there was never any Forbish man thing until 1968. They actually put him in a comic. And so he was sitting out there. And so I thought, well, that'll be fun. I'll just kind of bring him back and do these parody stories. And that's where I started getting semi-regular work, was in that book. But I was still back in Portland working in the commercial arts studio. And, what happened was I got sort of pigeonholed around Marvel as being this humor artist. And so when I tried to get superhero work, I couldn't get any. And so one of the trips that I had made back, because I was making regular trips, for probably 2 years back to New York every several months. And I had Renee Witterstatter, who was good friends with Michael Golden, and he was the art director at DC at that time. And so she introduced me to him, and I talked to him and stuff. And he gave me a critique of my work for the first time in my life that really sort of made sense to me, that I really understood where my shortcomings were and what I needed to do to fix them. So I was there for a week, and I was actually staying at Renee's apartment. She put me up. And so Golden was over there all the time. So I had like access to Michael Golden for 7 days in a row practically, right? So I was constantly picking his brain. And so that I stayed over a weekend. So I came in the middle of the week, stayed a weekend, and then halfway through the next week. And so that weekend I drew new sample pages, just like 3 pages of a Hulk Wolverine thing, based on the things that Michael Golden had told me and what I needed to do to improve my work. And so then Renee took me in to see Danny Fingeroth, who was a Spider-Man editor at that time. And so I showed him the samples, and he liked them enough that they were doing Spider-Man twice a month at that point. And Bagley was the artist on Spider-Man, and it was just killing him because he had to do so much work. So they started running short backup stories in the back of Amazing Spider-Man, and Danny started giving me some of those. And so it was a process where, I would do one and he wouldn't like it. And he'd say, you're just not really getting it. I'm not going to use you anymore. And I'd go, no, please, give me another chance. And I would do some more samples and give them to him. And he'd go, okay, yeah, this is more what I'm talking about. So this kind of went back and forth for a while. And I picked up a Darkhawk annual while I was there with another editor, just trying to meet people and trying to get work. And about that time, I had done the Darkhawk annual, and it was okay. It was better than the Spider-Man stuff, but it still wasn't great, but it was okay. It was like I was starting to kind of get it. And that's when Malibu contacted me about working on the Ultraverse stuff. And in Marvel, I was getting paid, I think, $70, $75 a page at that time. And Malibu offered me like $135 a page. So I said, okay, see you, Marvel. And when about that time I got offered, Renee Witterstatter got promoted to being a full-time editor, and they gave her She-Hulk, and John Byrne was leaving She-Hulk, and she offered me the regular gig. So I was going to do She-Hulk. But then John Romita Sr., who was the art director at Marvel at the time, saw my stuff and was like, this guy's not ready for a monthly book. You need to get somebody else to take over, which really he was right. But at the time it ticked me off, right? And so then Malibu comes along and offers me twice as much money. And I said, okay, screw you guys. I'm going to